Hello travelers, and welcome back to the Tavern. Medieval maps were strange things. They were filled with warnings, wonders, and strange beings that people believed lived beyond the known world. At the edges of these maps, you could find creatures that looked almost human, but something was always wrong. Some had no heads, with faces on their chests. Some had the heads of dogs. Some had one giant foot. Others had ears so large they could wrap around their bodies. These were the monstrous races of medieval geography. They came from ancient stories, travel rumors, religious writings, and imagination. Over time, they became part of how people pictured distant lands. These are the human monsters hidden on medieval maps. The Blemmyes may be one of the most unforgettable creatures ever placed on a medieval map. At first glance, they look human. They have arms, legs, and a body like any other person. Then you notice what is missing. There is no head on top of the shoulders. Instead, the face appears lower down, placed directly on the chest, or sometimes near the shoulders. To modern eyes, this sounds like fantasy, but for ancient and medieval writers, the Blemmyes were often treated as one of the strange peoples living far beyond the familiar world. The idea goes back to the ancient Greeks. Herodotus wrote about headless people called the Akephaloi, a name that meant headless ones. Later, Roman writers such as Pliny the Elder described similar beings and connected them with regions in Africa, including Libya, Nubia, and Ethiopia. Over time, the story traveled into medieval Europe. Writers copied older texts, travel stories repeated the legend, and map makers placed the Blemmyes near distant lands that most people would never see. On some medieval maps, they appeared near Ethiopia. In other traditions, they were pushed even farther away toward India. The movement tells us something important. The Blemmyes were more than creatures. They were a symbol of distance. The farther a place was from ordinary European experience, the easier it became to fill it with marvels. Some medieval sources even described different kinds of Blemmyes. One type had eyes and a mouth on the chest, another had facial features placed closer to the shoulders. Small details changed from source to source, but the main image stayed powerful. A human body with no head staring out from its own torso. For medieval audiences, creatures like this marked the edge of knowledge. They showed where geography began to turn into imagination. They also carried a warning. Beyond the known roads, beyond the familiar kingdoms, the world could become strange in ways that challenged what people believed a human being should look like. Today, we do not treat the Blemmyes as real people hidden somewhere on a map. But their image still survives because it captures something timeless. When humans reach the edge of what they know, they often fill the space with fear, wonder, and impossible faces staring back from the dark. The Cynocephaly were the dog-headed people of ancient and medieval legend. They were usually described with human bodies and the heads of dogs or sometimes jackals. In many stories, they lived far away from familiar lands in places like India, Ethiopia, North Africa, or Central Asia. Ancient writers spoke about them as distant tribes. Some said they barked instead of speaking. Others claimed they wore animal skins, hunted for food, and lived outside normal society. To readers at the time, these details made them feel wild, strange, and difficult to understand. But in the Middle Ages, the Cynocephaly became something more than mere monsters. Christian writers asked a serious question. If these beings existed, were they human? Did they have reason? Could they have souls? Could they be taught, baptized, and saved? Saint Augustine gave one of the most interesting answers. He argued that if such creatures truly existed and had rational minds, then they would still belong to the human family. Their strange appearance would not remove them from God's creation. That idea gave the Cynocephaly a deeper meaning. They stood on the border between human and animal, stranger and neighbor, monster and person. Their dog heads made them frightening, but the debate around them made people question what truly makes someone human. One of the most famous traditions connects them to Saint Christopher. In some Byzantine images, he appears with the head of a dog before his conversion. The meaning was powerful. Fate could transform even the most strange and feared figure into a holy one. On medieval maps, the Cynocephaly marked the distant edge of the world. But their legend also pointed inward, toward the fear that has always followed human societies. The fear of people who look, speak, or live differently. That is why the dog-headed people remained so memorable. They were strange enough to seem impossible, but close enough to humanity to make people uncomfortable. The Sciapodes were among the strangest human-like creatures found in ancient and medieval stories. They were described as people with only one leg, but that leg ended in a massive foot. According to legend, they could move with surprising speed, hopping across distant lands that most medieval Europeans would never see. Their most famous trait was even stranger. During the heat of the day, a Sciapod would lie on its back, lift its huge foot into the air, and use it as shade from the sun. That is where the name comes from. Sciapod means shadow foot. Ancient writers connected them with remote places such as India and Ethiopia. Later, medieval authors placed them beside other strange races on maps and in books about the wonders of the world. To readers, at the time, the Sciapodes were another sign that distant lands could hold people unlike anyone they had ever seen. But the Sciapod is interesting because it does not feel as violent or frightening as some other map monsters. It feels almost dreamlike. A one-legged person using a foot as an umbrella sounds strange, but it also shows how medieval imagination tried to explain life in extreme places. In hot, unknown regions, maybe people needed strange bodies to survive. Maybe the land itself was so different that its people had to be different too. That is what made the Sciapodes useful to medieval storytellers. They turned geography into wonder. They made the far edges of the world feel alive, strange, and full of impossible life. Today, the Sciapod stands as one of the strangest creations of medieval imagination, a creature born from the mysteries that once existed beyond the horizon. The Panotii were the giant-eared people of medieval legend. At first, they sound almost funny compared to the headless Blemmyes or the dog-headed Cynocephaly. They were described as human-like beings with ears so enormous they could cover most of the body. Some stories said they used these ears like blankets. Others said the ears worked almost like clothing, wrapping around them for warmth and protection from the cold. The earliest known description comes from Pliny the Elder, who placed them on the so-called All Ears Island near Scythia. Even their name points to their strange feature. Panotii means all ears. Later map makers and writers kept the legend alive. As the story moved through time, the Panotii were placed in different distant regions, including southern Asia. Like many map creatures, they seemed to move farther away whenever real geography became clearer. That detail matters. The Panotii were part of a larger pattern. When people did not fully understand a distant land, imagination filled the space. A cold island could become the home of people with ears large enough to use as blankets. A faraway region could become a place where human bodies changed to match the strange environment. The Panotii were not usually shown as dangerous. They were more like a wonder. Their huge ears made them memorable, but also oddly practical. In a world where survival depended on nature, the idea of a body that could protect itself from the cold had a strange kind of logic. Today, the Panotii remind us that medieval map monsters were not always born from fear. They came from curiosity, exaggeration, and a human need to explain places that felt far beyond reach. Medieval maps were windows into how people imagined the unknown. All these creatures may not have been real creatures waiting at the edge of the world, but they were real symbols of fear, curiosity, and wonder. They remind us that when people reached the limits of their knowledge, they filled the empty spaces with impossible things. And maybe that is why these old map monsters still feel so powerful today. They show us a world where every distant road could lead to something strange.